Welcome back to Backstory STL. For First Alert 4, I'm Matt Woods. My guest this week was a photographer at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for 25 years. He covered everything from Pope John Paul's visit to St. Louis to apartheid in South Africa and war in Bosnia. He captured history and let his faith guide him on some dangerous assignments. We got into the stories behind those stories in this episode, and I think you'll enjoy hearing some of those. Here's the backstory of Jerry Naunheim.
Are we on now?
Yes, we are.
Oh,
Good
I
to
didn't
go.
know. Yeah.
Sorry, I just kind of let it
Yeah,
naturally
okay.
go into it.
Yeah.
Just kind of a informal conversation
Sure.
and just see where it goes.
Okay.
That's what I've tried to do. So, yeah, thank you so much for stopping by. I'm excited to talk about your
Glad to be
stories
here.
from 25 years as a Post-Dispatch photographer,
Yeah.
and then some years after that doing freelance. Do you still do?
I still do freelance full time, so I've been doing that for like 16, 17 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I left 2007, I left the Post-Dispatch. So whatever, 2025 minus 2007 is.
Right. So, yeah, about 50. No, I can't do math right.
I can't either.
Almost. So you've been doing freelance like almost as long as what you.
You know,
did
15
for
years. I've been doing freelance even when I worked at the Post-Dispatch.
Oh, okay.
I did it in college. I did it all through journalism school. And I did it even when I was working at the Post-Dispatch, just as extra income.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so.
And then just going full time. Were you just kind of tired of the business, or just wanted to have more time to pursue your own stuff?
You mean, why did I leave the Post-Dispatch?
Yeah.
I didn't want to leave the Post-Dispatch necessarily. I figured I would work there till they took me out in a stretcher. In fact, two of our photographers worked into their 80s. But the Pulitzer family sold the Post-Dispatch to a company, and they offered us buyouts. So they offered anyone over 50 a buyout. So I started weighing what was going on over there and worrying about whether there were going to be layoffs. And I knew I could do okay financially doing freelance, so I actually wasn't sure about it, and they were only going to offer a certain number of people a buyout.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on a Catholic retreat at the time, so I asked all the guys to pray about it and help me decide whether I should leave or not. About halfway through the retreat, I made my decision that I should leave, because they were going to give us a buyout. I got almost a year's salary when I left. So I called my wife. I said, honey, I'm taking the buyout. She said, it's so risky. I said, well, it's risky to stay, it's risky to leave. So can you go down to the Post-Dispatch and put my name in? So she ran down there and put my name in on the list for taking the buyout. So then in September of 07, I left.
And
I
then
still
the next
miss
year,
it.
there was the financial crash. So.
Yeah, and funny thing, when the Pulitzer family sold the Post-Dispatch, the stock was about $40 a share, and a lot of us owned some stock in the company. By the time that crash was over, as far as that goes, it was like 40 cents a share. So the stock just plummeted. But I'm still, hoping that they can be viable and continue to publish a newspaper. I miss the newspaper. I miss journalism. I love photography, but it was journalism that was my real love.
Mm-hmm.
But I like what I do now, and I can support my family with it, and that's important to me. So, yeah.
So when you were kind of going into a career with journalism, how did you choose photography instead of maybe being a reporter?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I actually have a degree in biology, and I was a pre-med student, and it was very, very high stress, and I had really good grades at first at Mizzou, straight A's. But as the pressure built up, I started drinking more and doing things I shouldn't be doing, and my grades dropped, and finally I applied to medical school and I didn't get in the first time. Georgetown University wanted me to retake the MCAT, the MedCat, which is the entrance exam. I said, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it anymore. I just don't want to do this. So I went into the career planning and placement center at Mizzou. I told them I felt like I just wasted 4 years. And they said, well, what do you like to do? I said, well, I love photography. And I said, can you make a living at it? And they said, well, journalism is a pretty steady paycheck. I said, great. Do we have a journalism school here? They said, yeah, it's the best in the country. I said, where is it?
Right.
And they said, it's right across the street. So literally, I had never thought about being a journalist my whole life. I walked straight across the street that very day and signed up for journalism school. And that's how I got started.
And you didn't even know about how good the journalism school was?
I had never thought about journalism in my life. I didn't even know we had a journalism school. And Mizzou is like one of the top schools for sure.
Wow.
So it was kind of, I'll say it this way, I felt like God was guiding me in that way. He intervenes in your life sometime.
Right.
In ways we don't really necessarily notice at first, but in retrospect, you see where God has worked in your life sometimes.
So hopefully you didn't spend too much money on the biology stuff on college there before transitioning.
Well, no, in those days, I paid my whole way through college, both journalism school and pre-med. But school was pretty cheap in those days.
Or at
really,
least affordable to
yeah,
work
way,
through. Yeah,
way more affordable. I think, it was like $360 a semester or something for full-time class. And now it's, $10,000
yeah,
or something.
I wish.
Yeah. So I only borrowed $12,000, and I just paid it off a little at a time, which I encourage people to do. If you don't have the money, just borrow it and you can pay it off later. It's worth going to college. It's worth getting educated, and depending on what you want to do, you want to find a career that you love, that you can feel passionate about. So many people have jobs that they really don't like, and they're just counting the days so they can get through it. Not with me. I've loved every minute of my career as a photojournalist.
And so when did you know, like, okay, I'm gonna make this my career? Was it in college or was it after you started your career at the
No, it was journalism school when I made the decision. And then I applied for an internship at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, so I did a summer internship there. Excuse me, a summer internship there. And when it was over, the managing editor said, Jerry, we're going to hire you, but there's no openings right now. His name was Dave Littman. He was the managing editor. He said, but stay in the area, and as soon as something opens up, we're going to hire you. I'm like, great. So I went back and finished the last semester of school. I called them, and they said, well, there's still no opening now, but stick around. So I became an Associated Press photographer in Jefferson City. And I did that for about 6 months, but after about 5 months, the Post called and said, we have an opening. Can you come now? I said, well, I've already made a commitment to the AP. I don't feel like I can back out of my commitment. They said, well, we'll wait for you. So I came back, and I was hired as a maternity replacement for a great photographer named Karen Elshout. So I filled in for her when she came, and then when she came back, they hired me full time. It was great.
Yeah, what was it like landing that job? Back then at the Post-Dispatch, I think it was pretty hard to get hired right out of college, right?
It was, and I just felt very fortunate, and that's why I encourage students, if you can get an internship somewhere, get internships. It gives you a chance to find out if you like the company, and it gives the company a chance to find out if they like you. And then you have a way in, and that worked out great for me. I just loved that internship, and I loved working at the Post-Dispatch my whole life. Really great people, really interesting people. I made a lot of good friends. It's just a good life. And it's not just the photography, it's the journalism part where you get to meet so many interesting people. And I would tell people, I even like shooting Cook of the Week. I'd go to some older lady's house and photograph her cooking something, but I also loved going overseas and covering the war and covering conflicts in different countries. It's just all part of the package. You cover everything, and you get to meet people from all walks of life.
I interned at the Riverfront Times during COVID in 2020, so I never actually got to go in. And it was my senior year, and at that point, like, a lot of places stopped doing internships. Like KMOV stopped doing internships. So the one at the RFT was unpaid. Still did it. Got to do some cool stories, and you learn some stuff, and then hopefully take that with you.
Yeah.
And obviously, really unfortunate what happened with Riverfront Times.
Very unfortunate. It was around for a long, long time.
Yeah, there was one of the newspaper stands right by KMOV's old station downtown.
Yeah.
and I would always grab it on Thursday. I mean, they were still doing great stuff.
Yep.
Right up until
Great alternative paper.
Yeah. And so, whenever you started out, like what were some of the photographs that you done, stories that you've been a part of that kind of stuck with you? Like what do you tell people that you did at the Post?
So many things. One of the first big stories I worked on was doing the effects of the AIDS virus. So a reporter and I went to New York City, and at the time we were calling them AIDS patients, but they were like, no, we're not AIDS patients, we're people with AIDS. So it was a very new thing, and nobody really knew much about it, but it was kind of spreading across the country rampantly. So we spent, I think maybe a week in New York City doing stories on AIDS, because it hadn't really hit St. Louis too bad. So that's one of the first big stories I did. I did another, there was a big earthquake in California. I don't remember what year it was. It was called I can't remember the town, but it was near LA. So we flew out there. We landed the day after the earthquake. All the traffic lights were out. It was dark. The city was practically dark. It was called Northridge or Northbridge. So we went out there, and there was still a lot of aftershocks going on. We stayed in a hotel. All the TVs had shaken and fallen off the stands and were on the floor, and a bunch of the windows were broken, and there were aftershocks all night long. You'd wake up and the whole place would be shaking. And then we walked around and did stories, and there were still more aftershocks, and people were running out of the buildings crying, and I'm trying to cover everything I could, and it was very exciting. But there's so many stories I did. Another one I really enjoyed doing was the Pope's visit. So
John Paul, right?
Pope John Paul II, I did his visit. So the whole staff was involved in it, but I was the main photographer for the Mass itself. So a funny thing happened. On the way in, somehow I lost my pass. Or I don't know what happened, but I didn't have my pass. And they weren't going to let me in, so I stopped, went back, I thought about it for a few minutes, and then I just walked right in. And it was like I became invisible. I walked right past all the security, nobody stopped me. So it was kind of a little miracle. And then I photographed the Mass, and it was the very early days of digital photography. So I photographed the first part of the Mass, and I had a runner who took my digital card. He was waiting down below. He took the card, literally ran it up to the Post-Dispatch because it was only a few blocks away. They immediately processed it, put it in the paper, and by the time the Mass was over, they had those newspapers out, and they were selling them out in front of the thing. It was just amazing. Now, it doesn't seem as amazing today because we've had digital for so long, but to have a paper come out before the Mass was actually over was amazing.
Right.
So they pretty much had everything laid out, and pretty much of the stories written. They just had to have the picture to plug in, but it was a lot of fun.
Did that Mass, was it at the Cathedral Basilica?
No, there was a Mass there, but I think the big Mass was at the Dome.
Oh, okay.
It was called the TWA Dome then. But yeah, so it was only like 3 blocks away from the Post-Dispatch.
Right. Did they pack the house for that?
Oh yeah,
Mass?
it was jam-packed.
Wow.
Now, a funny thing happened. We thought all the streets were going to be lined with thousands and thousands of people, but there was so much bad press about how bad it was going to be. A lot of people just didn't show up. So the Pope was driving around in his Pope-mobile, but there weren't nearly as many people as we anticipated. And sometimes he was going pretty fast. So I was photographing people. I thought he'd come by like 5 miles an hour. He went by about 25 miles an hour, and people were like, oh. But it was very interesting.
So whenever it was found out that the Pope was going to come here, were you like, oh, I got to cover that?
Yeah, I was very excited about it. I don't know if a Pope had ever been to St. Louis or not. I don't think a Pope's ever been to St. Louis.
I think that's the only one you ever hear about.
Yeah.
It's like, remember when, of course, we always bring it up whenever there's big news with the Pope, and obviously Pope Francis just passing away.
Yeah.
And so always got to bring up whenever John Paul was here.
Of course.
You didn't get to meet him, did you?
No, but on our honeymoon, we got to have an audience with the Pope. So an audience, it's not like there's like 10 people, but you're up on the stage kind of thing with the Pope. And a funny thing happened. It's not funny, but we were waiting to go up and shake his hand and kiss his ring or whatever you do. And he spoke for a while, and then they took him away and were like, what happened? Well, what had happened is that the Pope had been up praying all night long because one of the Swiss guards had killed one of the other Swiss guards over some kind of a disagreement. So he was up praying all night long, so they cut our visit short, so we didn't actually get to shake his hand. But we still got to be right up there with him. It was very exciting. Some of the other things I enjoyed working for the Post-Dispatch, I spent 7 weeks in Africa doing stories about apartheid and the effects apartheid was having on all the other countries, not just South Africa, and then covering the war in Bosnia, which I mentioned was 95, 96. That was very exciting. And so many other stories, but even, as I was saying before, even the small stories I enjoyed. Just doing personal interest stories, just getting to know other people. So, yeah.
And so when you're going to a place like South Africa to cover apartheid, like, how do you figure out where you're going to go to capture those stories?
Well, that's interesting too. Most of that was done by the reporter and the editor, John Sawyer, who was in our Washington bureau. They kind of figured out what we were going to do, but we still just sort of played it by ear as long as we got there. So as a result, he was more interested sometimes in talking, doing interviews with people, government people and all that. And that didn't really make for good pictures for me, just taking pictures of people. So I came up with some of my own ideas. I traveled around by myself. At one point, he ended up leaving Mozambique, where we were first stationed, and he went to Zimbabwe. And I stayed back behind to do a story, because there was let me retrace a little bit. One thing I've learned about other cultures is you can tell a lot about a culture by the way they treat their children. So when I've gone on overseas assignments, I try to find out how these different cultures treat their children. So I had met this a Mozambican man and his girlfriend who was...
Sorry,
oh, that's all right. Who was a French nurse. I met them, and they worked in a hospital, kind of like a MASH unit. Didn't really even have electricity. They had generators. But there was this little girl named Fieza. She was about 10 years old, and her father had been killed in the revolution, and her mother died in childbirth. So this couple, they weren't married, they were just in a relationship. They were going to try to adopt this little girl, Fieza. And I thought, that's a great story. So I mentioned it to John. So he had another story he had to do. So he took some quotes down, and he took off and went to Zimbabwe. And I stayed back to do this story. So, which meant I had to hitchhike after the story was done. I had to hitchhike from this little camp hospital all the way to Zimbabwe. So I had 100 pounds of gear and all this stuff. And so I ended up standing out on the road, literally thumbing it. And all day long, no cars. Well, 3 cars came by, but every car was already filled with people because there were so few cars and people wanted to get where they were going. So I'm out there hitchhiking, just standing out there, little old me, and I see this troop transport come up full of soldiers. But I could tell they weren't Mozambicans. They seemed well equipped, and I stopped them. I said, I really need to get to Zimbabwe. Can you guys give me a ride? They said, no, we can't, but hold on a minute. So this soldier with a machine gun across his chest, he stood in the middle of the road and he put his hands up like this and he stopped a truck. It was like a big cargo truck pulling a big trailer. And he told the guy he had to give me a ride. So I'm like, okay. So I went around to the cab and there's somebody in there, right? He said, no. And he points up. Like, I don't know, what do you mean? What do you mean pointing up? So I look up, and there's another guy up there on top of the truck, literally just on top of the semi. So I look up, I'm like, oh, and he goes like this. So I start handing up my gear, and a bunch of other arms reached out and started. There were like 5 or 6 other guys up there. And they all lifted all my equipment up, and then they pulled me up. And then there we were on top of this truck on the way to Zimbabwe. So it was a long, long road, and we could only go about 25 miles an hour because they'd been putting mines in the road. If there's a pothole, they'd put a mine in it. So you had to be really careful and steer around all these mines. So it was a long, long haul, and I remember just baking in the sun, and I took my camera case and tried to cover up my arms. So these guys didn't speak English, but we communicated in sign language with each other. And at one point, I took my camera and I wrapped it around my foot. And I took kind of one of the first selfies of all time. I put it on self-timer and I took a picture of me and these guys. And so we finally got to a town where I was hoping to catch a bus or a train. And we got there, and these guys all got there, and they carried all my gear. Just, it was so amazing. And we got to the bus station, no bus. Got to the train station, we missed the train. And I had this funny feeling, I was thinking about that picture when I developed it. I just had this funny feeling that I may be the only one in the picture, and that these guys were like guardian angels. So I still have that picture, and I'll show you later. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so I looked around and I saw a car. It said, "Jesus loves you" in Portuguese. And I'd studied a little bit of Portuguese before I went there so I could communicate. So I went up and I knocked on the window, and the lady rolled down the window. I said, "Do you speak English?" She said, "A little bit." I said, "Well, I really need to get to Harare, Zimbabwe tonight, because I've been told this is a very dangerous city to be in." They said, "Don't stay there overnight." She said, "Oh, hop in, we are going now." So she spoke a little English. So we got in the car, and there was another hitchhiker in the car, and we drove to the border of Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and there were border guards, all machine gun guys. And when I went to cross the border, the guy said, "You have to pay $2,000. I said, $2,000? I don't have $2,000. "Then you must leave your cameras." I said, "I can't leave my cameras. This is my work. I won't be able to do any work." Mm-hmm. "Then you must pay $2,000. So I just stared him in the eye, just like I'm looking at you. And I just said a simple prayer. I said, "God, please help me. Please help me." And I just looked at him like that, and he stared me back, and finally, "Go." He said, "Go." Oh my gosh. It was like another miracle. And the ladies were getting all antsy, afraid, and so we ran to the car, and I get in the car, and we start driving away. And the ladies started saying prayer. And I couldn't tell what they were saying at all, but I knew it was a prayer. And then the ladies started crying because they were so nervous about crying. So they started crying, and then I looked at the other hitchhiker, and he was crying too. And then I started crying. It was just this emotional thing. So we crossed the border into the night and got to Zimbabwe.
Wow.
And then we did many more stories after that. I ended up going to Zambia. I actually got a ride there. The reporter and I kind of split up a little bit. So I hired a guy to drive me to a refugee camp on the border of Angola and Zambia, because I'd heard there was a refugee camp. And it was kind of a cynical situation. They had been planting mines all over the place, but they were kind of low explosive mines, so it'd only blow a person's leg off, it wouldn't kill them. The idea being these people would then become dependent upon the government. Instead of killing them, they could just bury them. Now they got all these people walking around with one leg. So I got to this refugee camp, and I got sick as a dog, because on the way there we stopped at a little roadside stand, and I bought a piece of sausage, and I ate it, and then I looked at it, and it was kind of raw in the middle.
Ooh.
So I just thought I better not eat any more of that. Well, by the time I got to this refugee camp, I was throwing up and everything else, everything you don't want to speak of. So I laid in this cot for 10 hours, just vomiting and in misery. But after 10 hours, I was able to get up, and I got out and did the story. I wrote a story, and I took a bunch of pictures, and finally got back to Zambia. But you got to know when you do these overseas things that everything is unpredictable. And I told people I never ever felt so much like I was being carried in the palm of God's hand as when I was on that hitchhiking thing, because I was just out of control. And it's not that I didn't care about my life? I do, of course. But I didn't have anybody depending upon me at the time.
Mm.
So later on, after I did the Africa story, I did the Bosnia story, they asked me to go to Afghanistan to cover the war there. By then I had a wife and 2 or 3 kids. I said, I can't really do it. I can't really take the risks necessary to do that kind of thing anymore.
Mm.
Not that I don't want to, but I have too many dependents now, so I didn't really do any overseas assignments after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you were just a rogue photographer. You know, you didn't have anybody else
Yeah.
with you. You're just kind of navigating
Yeah, I was
any
single
way you
and
can.
I had a girlfriend. Even when I went to Bosnia, I was dating my future wife. And the scariest thing about that is they were targeting journalists because there was all this ethnic cleansing going on.
Mm.
So the journalists were all trying to tell the truth of the story, and the Bosnian government was trying to keep this story from being told. I mean, it was pretty much like in Nazi Germany. They didn't want anybody taking pictures in these concentration camps because they didn't want the public to know what was going on. Well, the same thing, not the same thing, but a similar thing was going on with this ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. The ruling party was trying to kill all the Muslims.
Mm.
So they were lining them up literally and shooting hundreds of them, dropping them into mass graves and burying them. So I had been talking to my wife, my girlfriend at the time, and others, I would never want to go to Bosnia. So you're just going to get the same stories, people crying over gravestones and the same old thing. But then they asked me to go. So I thought about it for a day or two, and I decided I think I should do this.
Really?
Yeah. So I told Holly, that's my wife now, I was going, and she, of course, was very frightened, as was I. But it just seemed like a chance of a lifetime. So I took the chance, and I made it alive.
Did it for the story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, glad you made it through it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
and so I imagine that probably took a toll on you. Not just that trip, but the other ones. Probably seeing the reality for yourself and then having to relay it to people here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's a lot different to be involved in these things. Luckily, I didn't actually see any bodies in Bosnia, but I saw the results of the war, and I saw how it affected all the people who lived through it. The whole country was just bombed and bombed and bombed. And one time, I looked up on this big hillside, and there was a school up there, and it had just been bombed to smithereens. And I asked people, why do they keep shooting shells into that school? Because there's not even anybody in there anymore. Those kids are all gone. Mm. They said, well, they just do it to demoralize us, because they know that's where our kids went to school. So they would just launch bombs over there just to make us feel worse and worse and worse. It was just a terrible thing that went on in that country. And but the good thing that happened is as soon as the Americans went in, and we went in with the American troops, actually. I went in with helmets and flak jackets and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. The war basically ended. 20,000 American troops came in, and everybody just pretty much put their weapons down. With that big, and there had been all sorts of troops in there, but nothing like that. So then we all questioned, wow, why didn't they go in earlier? My gosh, this war has been going on for a long, long time. But I don't know. The government moves slowly sometimes.
Well, I think, didn't Clinton say, if I'm not getting confused, didn't Clinton say that was his biggest regret of his presidency, was not going into Bosnia earlier?
I think he may have said that.
Yeah, I think it was.
And it's sad, you know, you look in retrospect, you look back, whatever, and think, I should have done this, I should have done that. And clearly the Americans should have gone in earlier. But I don't think you can judge other people too harshly on making mistakes in the past, you know. You can't judge other people based on values that were in force before the present. And I think I was telling you earlier, I'm Catholic, so I want to go to Mass when I was over there if I could. But a priest here gave me kind of dispensation. He said, you're going to be in a war zone if you can't make it every Sunday. You know, it's okay. But I was able to go to Mass every Sunday in Bosnia, except one Sunday. And that was when President Clinton came. And so he was surrounded by troops, and we all had to get there really early. had to get through security, so I missed Mass that time. But other than that, I was able to go to Mass every day, every Sunday in Bosnia. So that was a good thing.
And seeing what you saw, being a man of faith,
Yeah.
did that affect your faith at all? Seeing the kind of the worst of humanity.
You know, I don't let that affect my faith. In fact, it's the opposite. I use my faith to help me deal with those situations. God gives us all a free will. Each person gets to do exactly as they please. That's part of how God shows his love for us. You can't force a person to love you. That wouldn't be love. That's just coercion. But God gives you the free will. And so some people choose evil, some people choose good. But there's a lot of people who choose a little evil, a little good. And we just do our best to do God's will. I do. And I think in general people try to do God's will. But when you see horrific situations like that, it doesn't make me trust less in God. It just maybe in a way brings me closer to God, because I turn more to God for comfort in these situations, for guidance on what I can do to help, for guidance on how I can lead my life better and not fall into the traps that so many people have fallen into. You know, even some of these dictators, they think they're doing the right thing, some of them. Clearly, as we look on them, they're not doing the right thing, but they think they're doing the right thing. But, you know, 100% of the time, if you ask me, they're not asking God what his will is. They're doing their own will. These dictators who perpetuate these atrocities. And somebody's also asked me, you know, I personally don't believe there is life on any other planet. But somebody said, well, what if they did find life on another planet? I said it still wouldn't shake my faith. I'd be fine with it. I just don't think, I think God created life on this planet, and he chose the earth to send his son Jesus. And I just don't think there is life on any other planet. And several people said to me, but think of that. There's billions and billions and trillions of other planets. There must be life somewhere. And I'm like, well, that's because you assume that life is just a random thing. But I don't see it that way. I think God created life. He chose to bring it to life. And you can do all the research you want. And to me, and I've tried to do this, you can't find any scientific explanation to how life could actually come into being without some intervention. You know, people say, well, there's chemicals and things came together and the lightning struck and it came to life. Come on. Have you ever heard of lightning bring anything to life? No, it does the exact opposite. That's just my feeling. I mean, everybody doesn't agree with me, obviously.
So, were you raised Catholic in the church?
I was raised Catholic, but I left the church for about 15 years. So why did I do that? I think I did it for the same reason I think a lot of people abandon God or turn their back on the church, because they want to do what they want to do. I wanted to have girls and do what I wanted to do and have the kind of relationships I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to drink all I want, and I wanted to be able to smoke pot all I want. And I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. So if you do make that decision in your life, you have to either do one of two things. You have to change and go back and try to do God's will, or you have to just pretend there's no God. Then you don't have to deal with that conflict. But with me, I could never let it go. And I was a vociferous atheist for many, many years. And I love to talk to Christians and just rip them to shreds with my incredible wit and strength of conviction. And same thing with Catholics. I didn't like the Catholic Church.
So you not only became an atheist for a while, but you actually had a grudge against the church, which I guess probably most people who leave the church like that probably do have an axe to grind.
I think you're absolutely right. And again, I think it has to do with people want to do what they want to do. They don't want to be told what to do. So how did I come back to the church? Well, I had a drug and alcohol problem, big time. And I went to see a counselor, and he's the one that talked me into getting some help. His name was Gene Witowitz. He was a great man, and he was a good Catholic psychologist, and his brother was a priest. So he kind of inched me back into the church a little bit. So it started out like this. He knew I was Catholic, and his psychological method was to try to get people to go back to the faith they were raised with. So he wouldn't try to make a Jew Catholic or a Catholic a Protestant or anything like that. But he would try to bring you back to the faith that you were raised in. So he gave me this little reading to read. And it was a little booklet. It had a little Bible verse in it, a little analysis. And he said, well, I want you to read this every day. I said, well, I don't believe in that crap. He said 2 things. Number 1, it's not crap. Number 2, read it anyway. So I did. And I started to get it, and I got the God thing then, but I couldn't get the Jesus thing, It sounded too much like a televangelism or something.
So how did he actually convince you then?
Just
Silly lights.
by repeated talking. So then he talked me into going back to church, so I did that. Then I went to confession, and I can tell you a little bit about that. So I had gone to St. Louis Priory for, not my whole year, for 3 years. And I actually had a lot of resentments against them too, because they were very Catholic. So I'd kind of turned on them. But when it was time to, do some reflection, I went to talk to a priest there, Father Rafe. Great, great man of God, Father Rafe Wright. He's a wonderful man, and he's still alive. And I went and I did a confession with him. And I told him, it's going to be a long one. I don't want to wait in line and have somebody scratching on the door to get in there. And when I was finished, he said, all right, Jerry, he was British, for your penance, I want you to go to Mass every day for a week. I said, what in the world? What happened to 3 Our Fathers and a Hail Mary? He said, no, every day for a week.
He said, you need a little bit more.
So I went every day for a week, and now I've been doing that for 35 years.
You've been going to Mass every day?
I've missed periodically. I don't have a perfect record, but my general habit is to go to Mass every day.
Wow.
People say, why do you go to Mass every day? I say, because I can. I can go receive the Eucharist. I can go to communion, and Jesus touches me, and I touch him physically. And I can do that every day. Imagine if you knew you could go get a hug from Jesus himself every day. You go. So that's what I do.
And so, at what point there did you decide, okay, now, your mindset has actually changed? Was it during the Masses every day for a week, or
Yeah, that pretty much changed it. And, another thing I told you, I had some resentment against St. Louis Priory. It was all my bad behavior. They didn't know how to deal with me. I was just wild and out of control. And there were these great British priests who, they came from England and things were different there. But part of my recovery was to go back and make amends to people whom I had harmed. So I went back and I talked to every one of those priests, and I asked them to forgive me for my bad behavior. They were so gracious. I am not kidding. They remembered me, I guess, because I was so bad. But they were just so kind. And after that, I started doing some work for Priory. I started photographing for them. And there was an older priest, his name was Father Timothy Horner. And he was the head guy there when I was there. And whenever he'd see me, he'd say, Jerry, I'll never forget the day you came back and apologized to all of us. And he would say that every time I'd see him. I'd only see him every few years or whatever. But it was a wonderful thing. And, I love those Benedictines now. And it just took me a while to realize that I was the problem. And that's part of recovery. Taking responsibility for your own bad behavior, and then taking responsibility for changing your behavior, doing what's right, trying to avoid what's wrong. That's part of recovering from addictions. And so I'm active in recovery. Yeah. So.
And how long has it been since then?
I've been sober 39 years.
39 years,
Yeah.
All right. Still going strong.
Still going.
So how long do you plan on continuing photography?
Well, as long as I can do this, I do focus with this, although they're all autofocus now, but I still got to hold the lens. I'll keep going. I love it still. And it's all people. I only really shoot people. I don't do art photography. But it's a good living. I still enjoy it every day. I don't enjoy the business part of it. At some point, I may hire somebody to just do the books and do the bills and just tell me where to go. Just tell me to be. I'll take the picture, and I'll do the processing. But somebody else runs a business because I never really wanted to be a businessman.
Yeah.
I just like the photography part of it. So most of the stress comes from doing taxes and billing and all that other baloney that comes with running a business.
Right. Yeah.
But it's part of it.
Self-employed.
Yeah, I'm self-employed.
There's perks, there's cons.
Yeah, and I'd always said I'd never want to be a freelancer because I wouldn't want the stress of having to get new business and all that. When I worked at the Post-Dispatch, I think it's a funny thing in journalism. The money is just kind of this thing that comes along with it. You don't talk about it. It's the mission. It's the mission of being a journalist. And everybody in it, we all complain a lot about different things, but I think we all love it. We do. So, but then when I left the Post, all of a sudden I had to think about the money and how I'm going to make more money. And then I had 3 kids and a wife and everybody to support. So that kind of weighs heavily on me. But it weighs heavily on everybody. Again, I turn to God and ask His help to help me get work and help me get what I need and do what I'm supposed to do. It's going okay so far.
There you go. So what's your average freelance gig?
My biggest client is Washington University.
Okay.
So I'm over there literally 2, 3, 4 times a week sometimes. So I shoot whatever, and people say, well, what do you do over there? Well, I do portraits, I do events, I do anything they can think of. They really are really good about covering everything that happens. So I kid that I shoot everything that moves and everything that doesn't move.
Right.
So I do a lot of work over there, and they're really, really nice people to work with. But I have a bunch of clients. I do a lot for SSM Health. I do some work for them. I do a lot of work for Ascension Health. I do work for the St. Louis Review. I just did a job for them yesterday. I do lawyer headshots. I do some schools. I just do about anything as long as it's nice. I only do nice stuff. I've been asked to do not nice stuff. Some magazine called me one time. I think it was some men's magazine. It wasn't Playboy, but it was something like that. And he asked me if I could do some pictures for the magazine. It was called, I can't think of it. I looked at it, I told the guy, I can't do this, I'm Catholic. I'm not taking pictures for this magazine.
You called the wrong guy.
Yeah, you called the wrong guy for this. So, but I still try to get new clients, try to stay busy. I still have 3 kids. They're all in their 20s, but we're not exactly, everybody's not totally financially on their own yet, so we help each other.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you feel necessary to bring up, or anything I didn't ask?
Nothing I can think of right now. Can you think of anything you haven't asked?
I don't think so. I think that was pretty good. I was really interesting to hear your times going to cover wars and apartheid, or whatever it is, and you see some really interesting stuff as a journalist.
It's a great life. I think anybody in journalism would probably tell you the same, especially working at the Post, because they really did a lot of global stories. They sent us overseas. They sent us all around the country. It's not quite what it was now. There were 20 photographers when I was there. Now there's like 4 or 5. So they have had massive layoffs down there. And that's not just the Post. It's almost every newspaper in the country has had a lot of layoffs because newspapers don't really have a good model for making money anymore. It used to be advertisers would have newspaper, magazines, TV, radio. That was about it. Now, everybody has, for instance, Schnucks, they have their own website. Bommarito Honda's got his own website. They all have their own websites. You don't need to go to the Post-Dispatch to get ads. So the ad revenue has plummeted. Even the classified ads, the ad revenue has plummeted because do you really look in the newspaper for a car anymore?
Right.
You don't do it. All the car dealers have their own website. So, you got to really pray that the free press remains free and viable. But one of the first things we learned in journalism school was the main function of a news organization or a newspaper is to keep an eye on the government. Somebody's got to be watching, not just the president, somebody's got to be watching the school board. Somebody's got to be watching all the local people in the government. Otherwise, who's going to keep an eye on those things?
Right.
So, we have sports and food and fashion and all that, but those are all great, but it's kind of gravy. The most important job of the newspaper is to do what they're supposed to do and keep an eye on the government. What's the first thing dictators do? They eliminate the free press because they don't want somebody poking their noses into their business.
Right.
So we got to find a way to support the newspapers and the radio stations and the TV stations, for the good of the country.
Right. And we've seen, Post-Dispatch and many other newspapers switch to the model of like subscribers on their website. And, hopefully it catches on that people are willing to pay for that kind of thing, because there's always people who are like, oh, it's behind a paywall. People just expect stuff to be free now because there's so much on the internet that is free. That's like, there's this valuable information, and people used to pay for the newspaper every day to show up at their door.
Why not pay for the website?
Right. There's a way to do it. It's just about, I think, convincing people that it's worth it.
Yeah.
If you read the Post every day, I think it's worth it, but,
Part of the problem is, and this is a little scary, people get their news from Facebook, of all places, and they think they're well informed, or some of these other just wild websites. You're not getting what you need to get from those things. And you should be willing to pay a little bit to support the journalists and to support these newspapers who are out there beating the bushes trying to find good stories. It's just difficult, but we need that.
Yeah, and I think local more than anything, because I think when people think about just generally the media and their perception of it, they think about national cable news or the New York Times, but we're talking about, the people who work in this building. Like, I wish there was a greater understanding of the work that we do in the Post-Dispatch and St. Louis Magazine, and that they do. Like, these people are your neighbors. You know what I mean? Like, we care about this community. We're not really not too worried about what's going on in the greater world, or whenever a big event happens here and maybe you see the national news, they descend on it. Well, whenever they leave, we're still here.
Yeah, that's right. We still have to lead our lives.
Right.
People are still doing interesting things here, and we just got to keep that local tone alive, really. So hopefully KMOV is doing that, and hopefully the Post-Dispatch will continue to do that.
Right. We try. We try our best.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. I won't take any more of your time today.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Me too.
Thanks for listening and watching Backstory STL. We'll release new episodes every Wednesday. Check it out on the First Alert 4 app or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.